Hello, my name is Griffin Morgan, 33 years old. I live in Sacramento, California. Or rather, I'm temporarily crashing here in my parents' house, the place where I was born and raised. That's the price I pay for the bold choices I made at 33. I used to be a programmer in Silicon Valley, working for a major tech company with a salary comfortable enough to live well. But I quit, a decision that, as I sit staring at the cracked ceiling in this room, I'm not sure was brave or foolish. I left everything behind to chase a startup dream. A tech agriculture venture I believed could change how the world produces food. But right now, that dream is just unfinished lines of code on my laptop and a rapidly dwindling bank account. Sacramento wasn't where I chose to return. This city, with its oak-lined streets and stifling afternoons, isn't a place that nurtures big dreams. It's where I grew up, where I used to ride my bike through quiet streets where my parents, Donald and Brenda Morgan, built their lives. But coming back here now, I feel like a failure. A three-year-old son still relying on his parents for a place to sleep. Every time I walk down the stairs, I hear my father's sigh, as if my presence is an unspoken burden. My father, Donald Morgan, is the kind of man you'd call patriarchal in the truest sense. He's the eldest in the family, always proud of shouldering responsibility, though sometimes I think he just enjoys the feeling of control. He runs a small construction company, not wildly successful, but enough to keep our family middle class. Dad always talks about money, about how to make more, how to maintain appearances in front of relatives. Money is the only thing that makes people respect you, Griffin, he'd say. His eyes sharp as if trying to etch the words into my brain. I never agreed with him. Maybe that's why we've clashed so often from when I was a kid to now, and I'm 33, and he still looks at me like I'm a failure. My mother, Brenda, is different. She's the kind of person who can make you laugh within seconds of meeting her. But then you realize her smile often comes with an agenda. She's charming, clever, and has a knack for flattery when it suits her. She always knows how to appease Dad, soothing his tempers, but I know she has her own calculations. Life is a game, Griffin, she told me when I was young, and you have to know how to play to win. I'm not sure what game she's playing, but I've always felt she keeps a distance from me, as if I'm part of her plan, but never the center of it. Then, there's my grandfather, Harold Morgan, whom I've only met a handful of times in my life. He's 82, living on a sprawling ranch in Idaho, a long drive from Sacramento. When I was a kid, my parents rarely took me to visit him. They were always busy, and I was preoccupied with school, friends, and childish dreams of becoming an astronaut or a genius programmer. My memories of Grandpa are faint. Just images of a tall, lanky man with white hair sitting on an old armchair on the porch of his ranch, staring out at endless cornfields. He's a man of few words, but his eyes always had a sharpness as if he could read everyone's thoughts. I'm not close to him, and that makes me feel guilty, especially since my grandmother passed away 6 months ago. But always hesitate. My life is messy enough as it is. Everything changed one Saturday afternoon while I was sitting in my room wrestling with a coding bug that had been driving me nuts all week. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my laptop screen. I heard my mom rush to open the door, her voice high-pitched with surprise. "Oh, Dad, why didn't you tell us you were coming?" I frowned, wondering who could make my mom so excited. As I walked down the stairs, I saw Grandpa Harold standing in the living room, leaning on his cane. His old cowboy hat tilted slightly on his head. He looked much older than the last time I saw him, but those eyes, sharp and determined, were unchanged. "Griffin," he called to me, his voice low but steady. "You've grown so much." I gave an awkward smile, unsure what to say. Grandpa isn't the hugging or sentimental type, so I just nodded and invited him to sit. My mom bustled about preparing drinks while my dad, just back from the office, looked at Grandpa with a mix of surprise and weariness. "Is something important bringing you here, Dad?" he asked, trying to sound polite. but I could hear the tension in his voice. Grandpa didn't answer right away. He sat down in the old armchair in the living room, tapping his cane lightly as if weighing something. Then he spoke slow and clear. "I want a family meeting. Call Philip and Lena here. There's something we need to discuss. Philip is my uncle, Grandpa's second son, living in Texas. Lena is my aunt, the youngest, settled in Oregon. I haven't seen them much, but I know the Morgan family isn't the type to gather easily. Everyone has their own lives, and what's called family bonds here is often overshadowed by personal agendas." But Grandpa had spoken, and no one dared argue. My dad called Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena, and within a few days they were in Sacramento. The family meeting took place on a Friday evening in my parents' dining room. The air was heavy despite Mom's efforts to lighten it with a spread of grilled meats and wine. Uncle Philip, a burly man with a booming voice, sat next to Aunt Lena, who's petite but has eyes as sharp as Grandpa's. My dad sat at the head of the table trying to project authority while Mom kept pouring wine, flashing an uneasy smile. I sat in the corner, feeling out of place among these relatives I've never truly understood. Grandpa stood up, leaning on his cane, looking at each of us. "I've sold the ranch," he said, his voice even, but like a bomb dropping in the room. Everyone froze. The Idaho ranch was Grandpa's pride, something he'd been tied to his whole life. $1, 200, 000. He continued, not meeting anyone's eyes. "That's what I have, and I want to make one thing clear. Whoever takes care of me from now on gets the entire sum." The room erupted, not in noise, but in a chaos of emotions. My dad let out a short, dry laugh, as if he'd heard a joke, but then realized it was real. "Are you serious, Dad?" he asked, his voice faltering, his eyes glinting like a hungry wolf catching the scent of prey. Mom, quick as a flash, jumped in, her voice so sweet it gave me chills. "Oh, Dad, of course you should stay with us. Our house in Sacramento is spacious, comfortable. You'll be happier here than anywhere else." She leaned toward Grandpa, her smile radiant. But I knew it was the smile of someone who'd just seen a life-changing opportunity. Uncle Philip slammed his hand on the table, the sound making me jump. "Hold on," he roared, his voice echoing through the room. "In Texas, I have my own ranch 10 times bigger than this cramped house, Dad. Come there and I'll treat you like a king." He turned to my dad, his eyes blazing. "Donald, don't think being the eldest gives you a free pass. You're busy with that little construction company. How can you take care of Dad better than I can?" My dad shot up, his chair screeching loudly. "Philip, how dare you?" he shouted, his face red. "You live in that mosquito-infested, sandstorm-ridden Texas. How can you take care of Dad? He needs stability. A decent place like Sacramento, not your horse barn." I'd never seen Dad so angry, but I knew he wasn't just defending Grandpa. He was defending the money. $1, 200, 000. That number was like a fire burning away any shred of decency left in the room. Aunt Lena, who'd been silent until now, suddenly laughed, a sharp cutting sound that sliced through the air. "You two are hilarious," she said, her voice soft, but dripping with sarcasm. "Acting like Dad's a prize to be fought over. If we're talking about care, my place in Oregon has clean air, and my house is near a major hospital with the best doctors. Dad, stay with me, and I'll take care of everything. Food, health, you name it." She looked at Grandpa, her eyes gleaming with confidence. "Dad, you know I'm your daughter. I'll take better care of you than these two bickering like children." I sat there, watching the three of them argue, their voices growing louder, more heated. Mom jumped in, trying to mediate, but really just adding fuel to the fire. Constantly stressing that Dad was the eldest, the most responsible. Uncle Philip rambled about how he'd helped Grandpa fix the horse barn when he was young, as if that proved his filial piety. Aunt Lena brought up how she regularly sent gifts to Grandpa, though everyone knew they were just cheap supermarket cookies. Grandpa stayed silent through the whole argument, his hand lightly tapping his cane. His eyes calm but piercing, as if he were watching a play whose ending he already knew. Finally, as Dad's and Uncle Philip's voices grew from shouting, Grandpa raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. The room fell silent, save for Dad's heavy breathing and the ticking of the wall clock. "Enough," Grandpa said, his voice low but commanding. "I don't want to hear any more. Donald, you're the eldest. You'll take care of me. That's my decision." Dad broke into a triumphant smile. Mom clapped her hands, squealing as if she'd just won a high-stakes game. "Oh, Dad, such a wise decision. We'll take great care of you," she said, her voice dripping with honey. But I saw Uncle Philip's eyes darken like a storm about to break. Aunt Lena just pursed her lips and looked away. But I knew she was furious, and I just sat there, a sense of unease rising in my chest. Grandpa's decision wasn't just about choosing a place to stay. It was a fuse. And I knew sooner or later it would tear this family apart. The day Grandpa officially moved to Sacramento, my parents' house turned into a stage for a grand performance. My mom, with her innate knack for organization, transformed that evening into a lavish feast. The dining table was set like a wedding banquet. A white silk tablecloth, our finest porcelain plates, and a massive roasted turkey centerpiece that filled the air with an aroma so enticing I had to admit Mom had poured her heart into it. Red wine shimmered in the glasses, and the chandelier's light reflected off everyone's beaming smiles. My dad, usually stern, was all laughs and chatter that night, raising his glass to toast Grandpa. "Dad, from now on, you're here with us, and this house will be a real family," he declared. His voice booming as if addressing a crowd of hundreds. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, holding his wine glass, his eyes calm but unreadable. "Thank you, my children," he said, his voice warm yet steady. Then, as if to underscore his decision, he slowly leaned down and opened an old canvas bag placed at the foot of his chair. We all watched in silence. He pulled out a stack of cash, tightly bound with rubber bands, each bundle crisp and new, the smell of paper and ink wafting through the room. He placed the stack on the table right in front of my dad. "This is $1, 200, 000. I'm entrusting it to you too," Grandpa said. The room fell silent. Not a single blink. Then my mom broke the stillness. "Oh my goodness," she exclaimed, rushing to the table, clapping her hands like a child unwrapping a birthday gift. "Dad, you're making me so happy I could cry. We're so grateful." My dad reached for a bundle of cash, and I could see his hands trembling. His eyes gleamed, not with emotion, but with a greedy, bewildered disbelief, as if he'd just stumbled upon a treasure and wasn't sure whether to hide it or shout in triumph. I sat at the corner of the table, watching the scene unfold like an unwilling audience member. I wasn't sure what I felt: admiration for Grandpa's generosity or unease at the sight of that massive sum in the hands of my dad. A man I knew saw everything through the lens of money. But that night, no one mentioned the tensions from the earlier family meeting. Everyone laughed, clinked gegged glasses, and pretended the Morgan family was a picture of perfect unity. The first few months passed peacefully, at least on the surface. My mom transformed herself into the ideal daughter-in-law. Every morning, she woke up early to prepare breakfast with toasted bread, fried eggs, and black coffee, just the way Grandpa liked it. "Dad, I made the coffee Idaho style," she'd say, her smile as bright as the morning sun. My dad made time to take Grandpa on walks around the neighborhood, pointing out new houses and boasting about his construction company. "See, Dad, Sacramento's booming. I'll use this money to expand the business, make you proud," he said, his voice brimming with ambition. Grandpa would nod, sometimes smile, but I noticed his smile never reached his eyes. I, in my cramped attic room, tried to focus on my startup. The lines of code on my laptop were my only hope of escaping this temporary stay. But every time I came downstairs, I'd see Grandpa sitting in the old armchair in the living room, leaning on his cane, staring quietly out the window. I started talking to him more. Not because of the money or duty, but because I sensed his loneliness. "Do you miss Idaho, Grandpa?" I asked one day as we sat drinking tea on the porch. He gazed into the distance, his voice low and melancholic. "I do, Griffin. That's where I was, truly myself." His words tugged at my heart as if he were trapped in a place that didn't belong to him. Things started to shift in the second year. My parents' fine enthusiasm began to fade like peeling paint, revealing the dull wall beneath. One morning, I overheard Mom complaining in the kitchen. Her voice no longer sugary. "Donald, you know, living costs have skyrocketed since Dad moved in. Electricity, water, and his food. How does he eat so much?" Dad, reviewing bills, nodded. "Yeah, it's expensive. But don't worry. That money will cover everything." He glanced quickly toward the living room where Grandpa was sitting, as if to ensure he hadn't heard, but I knew he did. I saw his hand tighten around his cane, a flicker of pain in his eyes. From then on, my parents' attitudes became more overt. Mom stopped making breakfast, leaving a box of cheap cereal on the table instead. "Dad, help yourself. I'm too busy," she'd say curtly, as if Grandpa were an uninvited tenant. Dad started complaining openly. "Dad, did you leave the TV on all night? The electric bill this month is through the roof." He snapped during one dinner, his tone harsh. At first, Grandpa tried to stand his ground. Once when Mom scolded him for spilling water on her new rug, he stood up, his voice firm. "Brenda, I gave Donald $1, 200, 000. Don't treat me like a freeloader." Mom froze, but then she smirked. "Dad, that money is for taking care of you, not for you to do whatever you want." Dad chimed in, his voice cold. "Exactly, Dad. This house has rules, and you need to respect them. Besides, who knows how long you'll live? Your $1 million might not even be enough." I stood there, my heart pounding, wanting to scream, but unable to. Grandpa looked at my parents, his eyes a mix of anger and disappointment, but he just turned away silently. Gradually, Grandpa grew weary. The small arguments in the house multiplied, but he stopped fighting back. One time when I saw him sitting alone in the living room, staring out the window as if longing for Idaho. "Aren't you tired, Grandpa?" I asked, sitting beside him. He gave a sad smile. "I am, Griffin, but what's the point of arguing? I just want peace." His words twisted my heart as if I were watching a giant imprisoned. In those tense days, Grandpa and I started talking more. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch with the sunset painting the street gold, I gathered the courage to ask, "Grandpa, why did you sell the ranch? I thought you loved it more than anything." He paused, tapping his cane lightly as if weighing his words. "I'm old, Griffin," he said, his voice low like the wind over a field. "The ranch was my whole life, but it was also a burden. After your grandma passed, I couldn't bear living there alone. I wanted to rest, to be near family. I thought selling it would bring me peace." He paused, a flicker of pain in his eyes. "But maybe I was wrong." Then he turned to me. "What about you, Griffin? How's your startup? You quit your job to chase a dream that can't be easy." I was surprised he cared. "I'm trying," I said hesitantly. "I want to build software to help farmers optimize crops, but right now I just have a few lines of code and an almost empty bank account." He nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Good, don't give up." I started with nothing. 2. Every time I fell, I got back up. You have to do the same. His words were like a spark, reigniting hope in me. Those conversations became the bright spot amid the household's growing tension. But my parents only got worse. They called Grandpa a burden, complaining about expenses, as if the 2 million had evaporated. One evening, as I was helping Grandpa fix an old radio, Dad stormed in, his face red. "Griffin, what are you doing hanging around Grandpa all day? Don't you have anything better to do?" he barked. I tried to stay calm. "I'm just helping Grandpa, Dad." But Grandpa looked at me, his eyes saying, "Don't argue." I couldn't stay silent. "You and Mom are treating him wrong," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "He's not a burden. He's the one who gave you a fortune." Dad smirked. "You, the freeloader, dare tell me how to live?" Mom cut in. "Griffin, enough. You have no right to speak in this house." Their words infuriated me, but I was powerless to do anything. That night, I lay, tossing and turning on the old bed in the attic room, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling like the world was crumbling around me. My parents' words echoed in my head. Freeloader failure. They cut into my pride like knives. I used to be a programmer in Silicon Valley, California, with a good job and a bright future. Yet here I was at 33, living off my parents, penniless with no prospects. My startup, the dream I'd bet everything on, was still just unfinished lines of code on my laptop and a nearly empty bank account. I felt no different from Grandpa, trapped, disrespected in my own family. The next morning, I packed my things, just a backpack with a few clothes, my laptop, and a notebook full of startup ideas. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. As I came down the stairs, I saw Grandpa sitting in the living room holding a cold cup of coffee. He looked up, his eyes questioning where I was going. "I can't stay here anymore, Grandpa," I said, my voice. "I can't watch Mom and Dad treat you like this." Grandpa didn't say anything, just nodded, but I saw a flicker of pain in his eyes. "Be careful, Griffin," he said, his voice low. "Life's not easy, but you have to be strong. Life's not easy. Life's not easy." I left my parents' house, my heart heavy, but also relieved. I rented a small room in a Sacramento suburb, barely big enough for a single bed, a rickety table, and a chipped wardrobe. It was cheap, but I still had to scrape together my meager savings to cover the rent. The room smelled of mildew, and the window creaked every time I opened it, but at least it was mine. I no longer had to endure my parents' harsh words or witness Grandpa being treated like an unwanted guest. But life didn't get easier. My startup was still stuck in neutral. I started working night shifts as a delivery driver to make ends meet. On those long nights, driving through Sacramento's quiet streets, I had time to think about Grandpa, my parents, my dreams. Some nights I was so exhausted I wanted to give up, but then I'd remember Grandpa's words. Every time I fell, I got back up. I told myself to keep going, if only to prove I wasn't the failure my dad claimed I was. I kept in touch with Grandpa through short phone calls. He didn't say much, but I could hear the weariness in his voice. "Everything okay?" "Grandpa," I'd ask, knowing the answer would never be honest. "I'm fine, don't worry about me," he'd say, but his voice was frail as if he were hiding his pain. I wanted to do something for him, but I had nothing to offer. Just myself, an unemployed dreamer with a fading ambition. The first few months in the rented room were an endless blur of exhaustion. I worked day and night coding for my startup and delivering packages until late. The room became a new kind of prison, not because of my parents, but because of my circumstances. I started doubting myself. Was I chasing a pipe dream? Could I really turn my agricultural software idea into reality? Those questions haunted me, especially on rainy nights when the sound of water dripping through a leak in the roof felt like a reminder of my failure. One day, I decided to visit my parents' house, not to see them, but to check on Grandpa. When I walked in, I found him sitting alone in the living room, leaning on his cane, his eyes vacant as he stared out the window. My parents weren't home, and I felt relieved. I came to see you, Grandpa, I said, forcing a smile. He looked at me, his eyes brightening slightly, but still tinged with sadness. You doing okay, Griffin? He asked, his voice low, but caring. Have you ever thought about giving up on your dream? His question caught me off guard. I never expected him to ask something so profound. Yes, Grandpa, I admitted, my voice soft. Some days I just want to go back to my old job, live an easier life, but then I think if I give up, I'll be no different from Dad, living just for money, not for passion. Grandpa nodded, his eyes seeming to see right through me. Good. Don't be like your dad. Don't let money blind you to who you are. That conversation was like a shot of adrenaline. But it couldn't erase the challenges closing in around me. I kept working, kept delivering. But my thoughts were always with Grandpa. I worried about him, afraid he was enduring more than he let on. In the months that followed, I threw myself into my work, trying to keep my dream alive. I made some small progress with the startup. A potential investor agreed to meet, though they promised nothing. But every time I thought of Grandpa, a sharp pain stabbed at me. I knew he was living in a house that was no longer a home, with people who saw him only as a means to money. I wanted to get him out of there, but I had nothing. No money, no house, not even a certain future. One stormy night, I returned from a delivery shift, soaked and exhausted, my shoes reeking of rainwater and mud. I collapsed onto the old bed, trying to shut my eyes and forget the fatigue when my phone buzzed. I glared at the screen, thinking it might be a late order. But it was Grandpa's number. My heart raced, a sinking feeling washing over me. Griffin. Grandpa's voice came through frail and trembling as if each word fought to escape his throat. I've left the house. Those words stabbed my heart sharp and painful. I shot up, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. What happened? I asked, my voice breaking, my mind reeling with 1,000 questions. I couldn't take it anymore. Griffin, Grandpa said, his voice choking as if he were holding back tears. I knew he'd never show. Donald and Brenda, they don't see me as their father anymore. They call me a burden, say I'm costing them money, that I'm ruining their lives. He paused and I heard him take a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady himself. Anger surged through me, hot and uncontrollable. They have no right to say that. I nearly lost it. You gave them everything. You sacrificed your ranch. How dare they treat you like this? But Grandpa only sighed, his voice fading. I don't know anymore, I called Philip, but he said I chose the wrong person. I called Lena, but she said her husband won't let me stay. I have no one left, Griffin, except you. His words were a dagger, both painful and heavy with responsibility. Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena, those who once fought to care for him because of the $1, $2 million, had now turned their backs as if he were worthless. Where are you? I asked, my voice trembling, but resolute. At a small motel, near the bus station, he replied weakly. I didn't want to bother you, Griffin, but I don't know where to go, and I don't have a dime left. Those words shattered every barrier in me. My eyes stung. Wait for me, Grandpa, I said, my voice firm despite the storm inside. I'm coming right now. I threw on my drenched jacket, grabbed my keys, and rushed out into the rain, which poured as if trying to drown the city. One thought consumed me. I had to bring Grandpa back, even if all I had was a cramped, rented room in a dying dream. The motel Grandpa mentioned was on the edge of Sacramento, a rundown place with a flickering neon sign. When I arrived, Grandpa stood under the awning, leaning on his cane, his old cowboy hat tilted on his head. His thin, frail figure looked small under the dim yellow light, a lonely silhouette in the rain. I ran to him, pulling him into the car, shielding him from the icy drops. Are you okay? I asked, my voice cracking with worry. He nodded, but I saw his eyes were red as if he'd been crying. "Thank you, Griffin," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I brought him to my cramped, rented room. It wasn't the Idaho ranch or my parents' comfortable house, but it was a place where I could make him feel loved. I pulled out the only chair for him to sit on and rummaged through the cabinet for a dry towel. "Wipe yourself down, don't catch a cold," I said, forcing a smile. Grandpa took the towel, but his eyes stayed fixed on the window where the rain still fell. "I never thought things would turn out like this," he said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I thought family would be where I'd find peace." His words twisted my heart. I sat on the floor beside him, unsure what to say. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," I whispered. "I should have done something for you sooner." He shook his head, tapping his cane lightly. "It's not your fault, Griffin. You're the only one in this family who still sees me as a person." His words were both painful and oddly comforting. I knew I didn't have much, but I'd do everything to protect him. In the days that followed, Grandpa and I began a new life in that tiny rented room. I gave him the bed while I slept on an old mattress on the floor. Each morning I made black coffee, the only thing I knew he liked, and we ate breakfast together. Usually just bread with peanut butter, but he never complained. "Tastes good, Griffin," he'd say, a faint smile on his lips. Though I knew he was trying to cheer me up. Our life wasn't easy. Rent, food, and small expenses quickly ate up the little money I earned from deliveries. My startup struggled, though. I spent every night coding, trying to perfect the software. Some nights I stayed up watching Grandpa sleep on the creaky bed, wondering if I was doing the right thing. I wanted to give him a better life, but all I had was determination and an unformed dream. One evening, as we ate a simple dinner of instant noodles and some vegetables, Grandpa suddenly asked, "Griffin, do you ever regret taking me in?" I froze, stunned that he'd think that. "No, Grandpa," I said, firmly. "My only regret is not doing it sooner." He looked at me, his eyes brightening as if he'd found a spark of hope. "You're more like me than you know," he said, his voice warm, stubborn but with a heart. Those conversations became bright spots in our tough days. Grandpa started sharing more about his life, how he built the Idaho ranch from nothing, the times he nearly lost everything to drought or debt. "There was a time I thought I wouldn't make it," he said, his eyes distant. "But every time I fell, I found a way to get up. You have to do that too." Griffin, his words were like a fire, reigniting my resolve to keep going despite life's attempts to crush me. I opened up to him, too. I told him about my startup, my dream of creating software to help farmers optimize crops. "I want to do something meaningful, Grandpa," I said, "but sometimes I'm scared I'm not strong enough." He nodded, tapping his cane lightly. "Fear is normal, but don't let it stop you. I was scared 1,000 times, but I'm still here." His words made me feel less alone. One evening, as we ate a simple dinner, I spoke up to Grandpa. "Grandpa, I think we should demand the money you gave my parents back. They don't deserve it." Grandpa looked up, his eyes briefly flashing with surprise, then sadness. "Griffin, what good would that do?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Money doesn't buy family." I shook my head, unwilling to accept his reasoning. "But you sacrificed your entire ranch. They have no right to spend that money while you're living like this." Grandpa only nodded slightly, saying nothing more, but his eyes seemed to convey that he had already accepted the loss of that money. I couldn't accept it. I decided to go back to my parents' house. Not because I wanted to confront them, I knew it wouldn't be easy, but because I wanted to do something for Grandpa, even if it was just a glimmer of hope. On a Saturday morning, I drove to their house, which now felt like a battlefield. As I walked in, I saw my parents in the living room. Dad watching TV, Mom scrolling on her phone. They looked at me, showing neither surprise nor warmth. "Griffin, what are you doing here?" Dad asked, his voice cold. his eyes not leaving the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm here to talk about Grandpa," I said firmly. "I want you to return the money he gave you. $1, 200, 000. That money belongs to him, and he needs it to live better." Dad let out a scornful laugh, the kind that made me want to punch the wall. "Return it," he said, finally turning to look at me. "You think I'm a bank? That money's been used to take care of him for the past year. Electricity, water, food. Do you know how much it costs to look after an old man?" My blood boiled. "Take care of him," I shouted, unable to hold back. "You call him a burden and yell at him all the time. That's not care. That's exploitation." Mom stood up, arms crossed, her eyes icy. "Griffin, how dare you talk to your parents like that? You, a failure who lived off us, now have the nerve to demand money. You're just as greedy." Her words cut like knives, but I didn't back down. "Grandpa gave you everything he had, and you treat him like a liability. He's living in a rundown rented room with me while you spend his money. Don't you feel any shame?" Dad shot to his feet, his face red with anger. "Shut your mouth," he roared, pointing at my face. "I took care of him for a year, put in all that effort. And what have you done? You're just a useless kid chasing your stupid startup." My heart felt like it was being crushed, but I didn't stop. "If you don't return the money, I'll find a way to get justice for Grandpa," I said, my voice trembling, but resolute. Mom smirked, stepping closer to me. "Justice? What can you do? That money was given to your father legally. Clearly. Your grandpa gave it to us willingly, not to you. Want to sue? Go ahead and try. You won't win." Her voice dripped with triumph as if she'd already secured victory. Dad cut in, his tone cold. "Get out of my house, Griffin. And don't ever come back demanding anything." I stood there, feeling the ground collapse beneath me. They were right. I had no proof, no legal standing to reclaim the money. Grandpa had willingly given it to Dad, and I, a homeless, penniless man with nothing but anger, could do nothing to change that. I turned and walked out, driving away. When I returned to the rented room, Grandpa was sitting in the old chair holding a book on farming. He looked up, his eyes reading the defeat on my face. "Didn't work, did it?" he asked, his voice soft, but tinged with sadness. I nodded, sitting on the floor beside him, feeling like the world was against me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice choking. "I tried, but they won't give the money back. They said it's all been spent on taking care of you." Grandpa nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder, his eyes calm. "I knew that would happen. Griffin, don't blame yourself. You've done enough." I bowed my head, a weight pressing on my chest. "But you deserve a better life," I said, my voice breaking. "I just want you to have a decent life." Grandpa smiled, a weak but warm smile. "You've already given me that, Griffin. A home, however small, where I feel respected. That's enough." His words made me want to cry, but I held back, grasping his hand, feeling the tremble in his frail fingers. In the days that followed, Grandpa and I continued our tough life in the rented room. I worked day and night delivering packages and trying to finish my startup, but the little money I earned barely covered our basic needs. Each time I saw Grandpa sitting in the old chair, reading under the dim light, a sharp pain stabbed at me. I had failed to reclaim his money, and that made me feel utterly useless. That year, winter came earlier than I expected, bringing a bone-chilling cold that seeped through the cracks of our run-down rented room. Grandpa, though he tried to maintain a strong front, was visibly weakening. He coughed more often, dry, hacking coughs that echoed through the night, jolting me awake. I was worried, but he brushed it off, his voice low and reassuring. "Just a cold, Griffin. Don't worry." But I knew it wasn't just a cold. At 83, his health had been worn down by years of hard labor in Idaho and the months of being treated like an unwanted guest in my parents' house. One morning, as I was brewing coffee, I heard Grandpa call from the small bed. His voice was faint, almost a whisper. I rushed to him, finding him lying there, his face pale, his breathing labored. "Grandpa," I cried, my hands trembling as I touched him. He tried to smile, but the smile couldn't hide his exhaustion. "Call an ambulance," he said, his voice faltering. Without a second thought, I dialed 911, my heart pounding as if it might burst. The ambulance arrived quickly, and I went with him to the hospital. The doctors said he had severe pneumonia, likely due to his age and weakened condition. He needed to stay for treatment, but the prognosis wasn't optimistic. I sat by his bedside, holding his hand, feeling the tremble in his frail fingers. "I'll stay here with you," I said, my voice choking. Grandpa nodded slightly, his eyes glinting with a trace of warmth. In the days that followed, I barely left the hospital. I stopped my delivery job, only returning to the rented room to grab clothes and catch a few hours of sleep before heading back. I took care of Grandpa, feeding him spoonfuls of porridge and placing cool cloths on his forehead when his fever spiked. He grew weaker each day, but his eyes remained bright, as if clinging to the last sparks of life. I told him about my startup, about the lines of code I'd recently finished, even though I knew he might not fully understand. "I'll make it, Grandpa," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded, his voice faint. "I believe in you." My parents, Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena, visited the hospital, but only out of obligation. Dad came, stood at the door, asked a few perfunctory questions, then left for a meeting. Mom brought a cheap bouquet of flowers, set it on the table, and sat scrolling on her phone, barely glancing at Grandpa. Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena showed up once, offered empty words, and disappeared. I looked at them. These people who called Grandpa their father, but their actions were like a performance to save face. Grandpa didn't say anything, but I knew he felt it. Once, when it was just the two of us in the room, he held my hand, his eyes heavy with sorrow. "You're the only one who's really here, Griffin," he said, his voice soft but certain. His words broke my heart. One night, as I dozed in the chair by his bed, I felt his hand tighten around mine. I jolted awake, seeing him look at me, his eyes clouded but filled with love. "Griffin," he whispered, his voice so faint I had to lean close to hear, but he said nothing more. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed, then stopped. I froze, calling his name, shaking him, but he didn't respond. Grandpa, the man who taught me about perseverance and love, slipped away in my arms without a final word. I sat there holding him, tears streaming down my face, unable to hold them back. The world seemed to collapse. I had lost Grandpa, the only person in this family who truly understood me. The funeral was held simply in a small church near the hospital. Dad arranged it. Despite receiving over $1 million from Grandpa, the funeral he prepared was painfully modest. A pine coffin, a few white flowers, and a brief eulogy. Mom, Uncle Philip, and Aunt Lena attended, but I knew they were there for appearances. They stood in a corner whispering to each other, their eyes devoid of grief. I looked at them, feeling like these people weren't family, not Grandpa's children. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a lawyer named Mr. Thompson, who said Grandpa had left a will and requested I come to his office. I went, my heart heavy, assuming Grandpa might have left me a few keepsakes, like his wooden cane or the farming book he often read. The lawyer's office was in downtown Sacramento, clean and upscale, a stark contrast to my life. Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses, invited me to sit and opened a thick file. Griffin Morgan. He began, his voice calm. "Mr. Harold Morgan left his entire estate to you." I nodded, unsurprised, thinking it might be a few small items. But then, Mr. Thompson continued, and his words hit me like a lightning bolt. Harold didn't just have the $1, $2 million from selling the ranch. He owned a portfolio worth over $20 million, including stocks and a significant amount of gold. He accumulated this wealth over 50 years quietly, without anyone in the family knowing. I sat there stunned, unable to believe my ears. $20 million. Grandpa, who I always thought was a simple farmer who lived with me in a shabby rented room, was that wealthy. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice faltering. Mr. Thompson nodded, sliding a stack of documents toward me. "This is the will drawn up 2 years ago and legally notarized. Harold left everything to you, Griffin, with one condition. You must use this wealth to do something meaningful." The room seemed to spin. I held the documents, my hands trembling, feeling like I was in a dream. But then I saw Grandpa's signature, the familiar, strong handwriting, and I knew it was real. My parents, Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena, were also invited to the will reading. And when Mr. Thompson announced the details, the room fell into a deadly silence. Dad's face went pale, his hands gripping the chair. "What?" he roared. $20 million! Why didn't he tell me?" Mom's mouth dropped open, her eyes panicked. "No way. We took care of him. Why give it to this kid?" Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena were equally shocked, their eyes turning to me with resentment. "What did you do to trick him, Griffin?" Aunt Lena asked, her voice sharp. I didn't answer. Just sat there, my mind still reeling. I hadn't known Grandpa was that rich. I only knew he was the man who taught me about love and perseverance. And now he'd left me not just money, but a tremendous responsibility. In the days following the will reading, I felt like I was caught in a whirlwind. I couldn't believe that Grandpa, who had lived so simply beside me in that cramped rented room, had amassed such an enormous fortune, $20 million, stocks, land, gold, all accumulated quietly over 50 years, unbeknownst to anyone in the family. Beyond the shock, I felt a heavy responsibility settle on my shoulders. Grandpa hadn't just left me money, he'd left me a message. Do something meaningful. His words echoed in my mind, a guiding flame through those chaotic days. My parents, Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena, wouldn't leave me alone. They called constantly, their tones shifting between sweet talk and threats. "Griffin, you have to share some with everyone." "It's only fair," Mom said over the phone, her voice dripping with honey. But I could hear the falseness. When I refused, Dad roared, "You think you have the right to keep it all? I'll sue you." Uncle Philip and Aunt Lena were no different, sending long messages with every excuse to claim a share. But I stood firm. Grandpa made it clear, whoever took care of him would inherit. I replied coldly. And I was the only one there for him when you all turned your backs. Grandpa's will was legally notarized, accompanied by a video he recorded himself, confirming I was the only one he trusted. The legal battle they threatened never materialized. They knew they had no chance. With that immense wealth, I knew I had to do something worthy of Grandpa. I started by investing in my startup. The idea of software to help farmers optimize crops, save water, and boost yields was no longer a distant dream. I hired a team of programmers, rented a small office in Sacramento, and began turning my unfinished code into reality. Within a year, my startup, now named Idaho Grow in honor of Grandpa's ranch, became a leading agricultural tech company. We partnered with farmers in California, Nevada, and even Idaho, providing tools to combat drought and climate change. Each time I saw data from our software saving a farmer's crop, it was as if Grandpa was smiling down from somewhere. But I didn't want to stop there. Grandpa taught me that life wasn't just about making money. It was about creating meaning. I used a significant portion of the wealth to build a nursing home called Harold's Haven, a place for elderly people abandoned by their families. People like Grandpa, once deemed burdens. I designed it not just as a residence, but as a true home. At Harold's Haven, every resident had their own room, received attentive medical care, and could participate in activities like gardening, reading, or storytelling, things Grandpa loved. I hired dedicated staff who treated the residents like family, not just a job. On the opening day of Harold's Haven, I stood before the building, looking at the sign bearing Grandpa's name, and felt a tear roll down my cheek. I did it. Grandpa, I whispered, as if he were still beside me. Our story unexpectedly caught the media's attention. A Sacramento newspaper published an article about our journey from the tough days in the rented room to the surprise will and how I used the money to make a difference. The article spread shared widely on social media, and soon I received hundreds of messages from across the country. Some thanked me for inspiring them, others shared stories of their own elderly relatives abandoned by family, and some asked for help. One afternoon, while checking on progress at Harold's Haven, a boy about 10 years old with big round eyes and messy hair ran up and grabbed my hand. "Mr. Griffin," he said shrilly, "my grandpa was abandoned too. Can you help?" I looked at the boy, feeling as if I were seeing myself from years ago, helpless against my family's indifference. I knelt down, smiling. "Bring your grandpa here. He'll be loved." The boy nodded, his eyes lighting up, and I knew Harold's Haven wasn't just a nursing home. It was Grandpa's legacy, a place for the forgotten to find a home. Our story inspired many. I received invitations to speak at conferences, sharing my journey from a freeloader to the head of a tech company and a humanitarian organization. Each time I stood before a crowd, I shared the lesson Grandpa taught me. Not all blood is trustworthy. It's those who treat you with their heart that matter. I never mentioned my parents, Uncle Philip or Aunt Lena, in my talks. They'd chosen their path, and I no longer held a grudge. I just wanted to focus on what Grandpa left behind. Not just money, but a way of living, a reason to rise after every fall. One afternoon, as I stood in front of Harold's Haven, watching the elderly residents play chess under the oak trees, I felt a peace I'd never known. My startup was thriving. Harold's Haven had become a home for dozens, and I knew I was doing what Grandpa wanted. I looked up at the sky, imagining him smiling down. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered, and for the first time in years, I felt I truly belonged somewhere. Each day, I pressed on with my work. Idaho Grow exceeded expectations, becoming a trusted agricultural tech company for farmers across the United States. Harold's Haven expanded with a new facility in Nevada, and I established a scholarship fund in Grandpa's name to support young people pursuing dreams in agriculture or technology. But above all, I lived with the purpose Grandpa instilled in me, to do something meaningful. I didn't want to be just a wealthy man. I wanted to be someone who made the world a little better. One evening, standing on the balcony of Idaho Grow's office, looking down at Sacramento's twinkling lights, I reflected on my journey from a freeloader failure living in my parents' attic to leading a tech company and a haven for the forgotten. I thought of Grandpa, of the days we shared instant noodles, of the stories he told under dim lights. I thought of his words and only, "Don't let fear stop you." And I knew, though he was no longer here, he remained the flame guiding my path. My advice to you if you're reading this story is to live with your heart. Life will have moments when you feel alone, abandoned, or doubt yourself. But seek out those who truly love you, not for money or gain, but for who you are. Persevere with your dreams, no matter how distant they seem. And most importantly, do something meaningful, not just for yourself, but for those around you. That's how Grandpa lived, and that's how I choose to carry on.